Heard of Q broadcast? It's taking the world by storm. People are cutting the cord to their high cable bills and moving away from streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, and others for something better. Q broadcast. For just $60 a month, you'll get access to every channel you could ever want, including HBO, Cinemax, and Stars. And the best part? There are no contracts, no hidden fees, and you're free to cancel anytime. With Q Broadcast, you can enjoy streaming live TV, movies, and top series on up to 5 devices at once. Whether you're at home or on the go, Q Broadcast makes sure your entertainment is always at your fingertips. Imagine being able to watch all your favorite channels from anywhere, anytime, without any restrictions. We're talking about thousands of movies, hundreds of TV series, and a huge library of live channels, all in one place. And don't forget video on demand and pay-per-view events. Those are included at no extra cost, so you'll never miss a big event again. Now, take a second and think about your current cable bill. You're probably paying anywhere between $100 and $300 every month, locked into long-term contracts and hit with surprise rate increases. With Q Broadcast, that's a thing of the past. It's just $60 a month. No contracts, no extra fees, no hidden costs, and no price hikes. Why juggle multiple subscriptions like Netflix, Hulu, and cable when Q Broadcast gives you everything you need in one convenient package? People everywhere are switching to Q Broadcast, saving money and getting more content than ever before. So, what are you waiting for? Click the link in the description and sign up for Q Broadcast today. Just $60 a month, no contracts, no hidden fees. It's time to take control of your entertainment and start streaming smarter.
We live in a world where men are told it's harmless. It's just entertainment. Let's stop lying to ourselves. Pornography destroys. It weakens your spirit. It dulls your drive. And it robs you of what real intimacy is supposed to be. Every click is a step away from the man you're supposed to be. We can't call ourselves leaders if we are slaves to a screen.
As someone that is prior service, I know all about discipline. And discipline isn't out there, it's within your mind. Porn rewires your brain, weakens your will, wrecks all of your relationships. It doesn't just stay on a screen, it invades your marriage, your confidence, and your actual purpose. As men, if we don't learn to discipline ourselves, we'll be ruled by our impulses. Now, it is time to stand up and take control before this silent war takes more than you're willing to lose.
Real men don't hide in the shadows of shame. We step up and we protect what's ours. We fight for our wives and kids, our own hearts. Twitter isn't just an app, it's a weapon. It's a tool used to break free and start living like the man that you're meant to be. The battle's here and it starts with you. You can stop living in shame and you can break free today.
Heard of Q broadcast? It's taking the world by storm. People are cutting the cord to their high cable bills and moving away from streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, and others for something better. Q broadcast. For just $60 a month, you'll get.
Here at the Anomic Age, we know that these times of uncertainty are stressful. It is incumbent upon all of us to put our fears first and bow down to government tyranny. Gone are the days of freely leaving your home, working, and social interactions. In exchange for safety, we will trade liberty. At the Anomic Age, we understand. However, just in case you want to get off your knees and stop being a sniveling coward, check out the John Age Project at anomicage.com.
Meet Anne Morrissey, who is here with her daughter, Dareth. Dareth is 17 years old. Mrs. Morrissey, I don't have to tell you that most parents would be extremely depressed if their daughter came home one day looking like this. I assume that was your response shock, anger, depression? What was it?
I was extremely angry. I really went bananas.
Yeah, how old was she when this happened?
Possibly 13, 14 years old.
We're talking like it's a disease, and
Well,
yeah. How did she explain it to you, Mrs. Morrison?
there was very poor communication until we went into counseling. And it almost broke up our family. But through counseling and Serena, I can understand it better.
What do you understand?
That she feels like she doesn't want to be like everyone else, and she wants to be her own person. And through the dress code and her lifestyle, she's expressing this. It doesn't conform with our rules, but we're learning to cope, and it's a very, very difficult thing. Extremely difficult.
Dareth, let's let you talk for yourself. You're from Long Beach, California.
I just can't handle being like everybody else because that's what everybody else wants, you know. Just because somebody else does something does not mean that I have to do it. You know, I have my own morals and ideals, and I go by them.
Are you drug-free, Dareth?
Yes, I am.
Is this a political statement then? Do you have some misgiving about the society that you see?
Yeah, there's a lot of problems, you know. A lot of the people are really aware of what's going on, you know, and I don't like it, you know. There's a lot of problems. What? I don't like the way society is based.
What bothers you? Give us some of the misgivings you have.
The rich, the poor, the people starving, the wars, you know. Why can't, you know, everybody just get along and just live their life?
Here at the Anomic Age, we know that these times of uncertainty are stressful. It is incumbent upon all of us to put our fears first and bow down to government tyranny.
Talon Real and Chevy.
Propagating truth in a world of lies. You are listening to the John H. Project.
Trust no one. Trust no one. Trust no one.
You found it. You're here. You're headlong down the runaway train that is the Anomic Age, and I am your host, John H. Happy to be back with you once again, hailing from the coastal plains of the old North State. I'll be your tour guide as we take a journey into the paranormal and the unknown tonight. It's going to be a great experience. We got a great guest. Mr. John Rhodes is with us this evening. So before we get into all that, please check out anomicage.com. It's the best place to find all things me. Like all the likes, subscribe to all the subscriptions. PayPal.me/anomicage, Patreon.com/anomicage as well. So to won't belabor any of those points this evening, let's get right down into it. John Rhodes, widely known as a crypto hunter, is an American researcher, investigator, TV personality, recognized for his decades-long work exploring unexplained phenomena, hidden histories, and unconventional scientific questions. Since the early 1990s, John has conducted pioneering research into the concept of crypto-terrestrials, proposing that non-human intelligences may share Earth with humanity while remaining largely hidden. You can find all of his research right there at cryptoids.com, which I'm putting on your screen right now. So cryptoids.com is the best place to find all things John Rhodes. Thank you so much for being with us today, John.
Hey, you're welcome. Thanks for having me on, John. By the way, that's reptoids.com.
Oh, my goodness, man.
Reptoids.
Reptoids. My apologies. It's
yeah, I just didn't want you
to.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I've looked forward to this talk.
Yeah, my apologies. It's actually correct on the website and under your name right now on the screen. So.
Right on. Right on.
Thank you so much, John, for being with us, man. We got to talk a little bit before the show, which was great. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time and dealing with the technology today for a few minutes, man. It's been fun talking to you in the midst of all this. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. And thanks for getting us through that technical problem we were having there.
Of course. And the gremlins always come out when I do a show, it seems. It'll be perfect for 8 hours before that. And then that 1 little minute, it'll all go down. But thank you, man.
Yeah, it's all the jinns. It's the jinns, the serpent, the reptilian whirlpool, desert sandstorm whirlpools, that come out and infect technologies.
I would not be surprised. Well, thank you so much. And let's just take the easy one here. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I know it's the first time on the show. I'm so happy to have you. And we got to hopefully have it on again. I was trying to do some show prep and there was so much to talk about. I was trying to narrow it down a little bit, but the easiest question of all, how did you get into this kind of very abnormal, paranormal world from just a normal guy, so to speak, quote unquote, normal guy?
Well, like everybody else, I was just out there one day and I had nothing better to do. No good movies were playing. I just thought, well, where could I go to meet some interesting people? I didn't want to go to a meditation group. I was a little too lively for that. And I heard that there was a UFO group, that people were talking about anomalous sightings. I was in Vegas at the time. So, of course, sightings and Vegas kind of go together because of all the work up there north of the range on the test site and everything. So I thought, okay, well, this would be an eclectic group to go talk to. And when I started going there, I was very much to myself, but I was listening to people, and a lot of people were talking about having encounters with little gray creatures that were walking around, kind of like Steven Spielberg presented in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And one person pulled me off to the side and was talking to me more or less in private because they didn't want to hear anybody else or have anybody else hear them. And they were saying, I'm having something different happen. And when they'd explain it to me, this was a reptilian humanoid form that they had contact with. And I thought, well, that was kind of different. But when I did some traveling, I went to other UFO groups and it was the same thing. Only once in a while would I hear somebody talk about this reptilian humanoid figure that they had encountered. And then when I realized through my series of questions I asked them, there was information regarding their events that were simultaneously duplicate, but these people had no contact between each other. And so it's like leaving a fingerprint behind. When you start seeing these fingerprints being in activity in the way they conduct their activities, the modus operandi, then you start recognizing there might be something going on here. And I started looking deeper into it. But once I started saying, well, wait a minute, there's a cultural thing going on here, but because these people might be just entertaining demons in their own mind, perhaps, I started looking into the cultural aspects of it. And that's when I started saying, wait a minute, it says here, even in the Bible, that there, in the Garden of Eden, there was everything was good, but then there was the serpent, and the serpent spoke to Adam and Eve, which was totally unusual. Because I think the Bible only records maybe a donkey or something speaking. And I thought, well, that's still a very unusual thing for the Bible. And then when I looked into the older text from which the Bible was derived, the older Jewish text, I looked in like the Haggadah, and in the Haggadah, they also speak about the serpent having arms and legs of a man, and that it stood upright, and actually at one point even chased Adam through the garden. And so it had arms and legs of a man. This seemed to match up to what I was hearing about. And then two other things occurred. The first thing was in the Roswell event, I was watching a program one night, and the mortician that was in charge of acquiring the caskets for the small bodies that were supposedly recovered from the craft, Glenn Dennis. I saw an interview with him, which he was talking about when he had met the nurse that was with the military crew. The nurse had drawn him a picture of the hand of one of the alien beings, and I noticed it had small circular pads or circles on its fingertips. And I thought, that's unusual. That's kind of like an arboreal or a tree lizard would have. Mm-hmm. They have these small circular pads on their fingertips, which actually have small microscopic barbs on them that can hold on to irregular surfaces we normally perceive as smooth. So that's how they're able to climb up the roofs and everything up, like there were walls, seemingly small, smooth walls. And then I said, well, this seems to have maybe an earthborne attribute to it. If we have arboreal lizards with these little fingerprint pads, and we're hearing this from somebody talking about something that's alien, maybe we're listening to something that's not so much alien, but that's something from here. And then I noticed also that there seemed to be at the time, Dale Russell, who was a very famous paleontologist, discovering, talking about dinosaurs. He was on TV all the time. Mm-hmm. He had at one point done a thought experiment for the Canadian Museum of Nature up in Canada with his associate Ron Seguin, and they came up with a humanoid form that had reptilian characteristics to it, and said if the Troodon dinosaur from 65 million years ago had been allowed to survive, it would have had eventually retained this upright form and looked more humanoid over time. Now, this was based on science. This is based on paleontological work. And it said that I looked at the attributes that Troodon, also known as Stenonychosaurus inequalis, what it had is it was tall, it was upright on two legs, it had an opposable thumb. It was one of the first dinosaurs to actually have an opposable thumb. Wow. And it had its eyes over time were morphologically changing with evolution and going from the side of the head more towards the front of the head. And this allowed them cross-sectional viewing, which allowed for more depth perception, better hunting, better depth perception. And then also it had one of the largest brain cases amongst the dinosaurs. And this means that its brain had the capacity perhaps to be more intelligent, and that this was the actual evolutionary trend that the dinosaurs were going into. Most dinosaurs were bipedal. They were not quadrupeds. The early dinosaurs were on four legs, but most of the later dinosaurs were on two legs. So you start seeing where science starts agreeing with what we have from ancient history, although the lines are blurred because we haven't found any bones, which just, as you probably know, of the dinosaurs we find bones, there were millions and millions and millions of them. So to even find the skeletal remains of a dinosaur is so rare. So when people say, how can you not find the bones of these things? Well, if they took up refuge inside the earth, which is the nature of a reptile, instead of on the surface, there would probably be evidence, but we're not going to see it. The weathering of time and everything does away, and it just makes everything on the surface disappear over time. So putting those things together, I thought, well, this is a very interesting pursuit to undertake, because it involved looking back through ancient history and cultures and how they looked at the reptilian life form. I had to look at the human psychology, at the root of the reptilian brain, how that could influence our thinking and our emotions to come up with these images from a deep sleep state or anything like that, in order to analyze whether people were having things happen to them that were physical or truly just that which was born in their head. And when I started seeing there were both, it made it that much more compelling, because I couldn't ignore the fact that the reptilian part of this discussion regarding alien beings had been very much suppressed in the media. But the media, in the meantime, since the early 1990s, when I got involved in this, has been putting out more and more reptilian imagery. and like the movie V or the television series V, for example. Enemy Mine is another television movie with Dennis Quaid. Talks about a reptilian being and a human being sharing the same cultural basis of beliefs and how they get along for their own survival. And I think actually the government over time has also reduced the discussion of alien beings to say extraterrestrial repeatedly, because they don't want people to start introducing a challenge into the political arena, saying, is there anything else on Earth that was Earthborn? It's not extraterrestrial, but is there anything else on Earth that could have had the capability of reaching a higher intelligence? And that's who we might be dealing with. They keep saying to us over and over again, there's no extraterrestrial threat, but they never say that there's no other terrestrial threat. They keep saying it's not Russia, it's not China with these craft, it's not this. They know who it's not. How can they know who it's not if they don't know who it is?
Yeah.
See, that's what. How can you say it's not all these other countries unless you know who it is? So that right there, that shows their hand right there. And these discussions, like in Washington, where these people are caught up in the politics of ufology, need to start changing the words they use. Otherwise, they're trapped by the limitations of their own language.
Yeah, it seems like it's kind of lying by omission. It's like, well, you didn't specify, like on a FOIA request or something. You didn't specify this one little sector. You just said all these.
Yes, and a lot of these people who we're discussing these things with, these politicians, are advised by or were formerly themselves attorneys. And if attorney is not asked a direct question and one that's carefully formed, they don't answer it. They feel that that's a slip that they can get right through. They don't have to answer it correctly. And when the government keeps saying there's no extraterrestrial threat, well, is there a non-human terrestrial threat? But see, that doesn't get asked. And I think that's a very interesting thing, as well as we keep thinking that maybe the government thinks that if we are suddenly told that the threat is here and it's now, and it's not off our planet, that people can't handle that idea. And if something does come from off our planet, how do we know that it wasn't part of their own culture that broke away to explore space and are coming back home?
Could be.
We might live on a planet with intelligent neighbors.
Yeah.
And I think that's a greater possibility than people can imagine.
And I think they use the movies sometimes to sort of tell people, the predictive programming theory of like, they're telling people what's really going on. And I don't know if you've seen it, but there's an old 70s movie. I'm a sucker for old 70s horror movies. It's an old 70s movie called Gargoyles. I think it's like early 70s.
Oh, yes. Out in the desert.
Yeah, but anytime you think about this reptilian thing, like that's where my mind's eye, it conjures the images from that movie. And I'm like, that movie and the early 80s TV show V, not the remake, but the old one, that's right. Stuff I remember. But
right. And and the word gets out. Hollywood presses its ear against ufology because it's trying to come up with new ideas that they can put on television. A lot of these writers out there, they don't have any idea about ufology. They're just basically fishing amongst the ufologists and taking information from them and working them into scripts that they want to do. But also there's, you have to question who runs Hollywood. And I do believe there's a cabal of people who run Hollywood. And those people very much are in charge of also ufology. And they're one and the same, because the television can't allow people to go out there and sound too credible, because it might change the entire worldview. In the case with reptilians, once we cross the threshold of something like 3% of America, 10 million people believe in UFOs, but 10 million people believe in reptilian humanoids now. So that's why when I was doing the discussions and doing television appearances earlier on with like Robert Stack, Unsolved Mysteries, there weren't that many television shows out there. The internet wasn't flooded with a whole bunch of people and entertainment. So the audience was absolutely massive. But see, I got my word out earlier on, and a lot of those kids that watch Star Trek and everything like that were able to hear it. And now they're young adults and mature adults, and they're pursuing this question that they had heard or contemplated upon. And it's becoming more and more popular. It's growing. Although there are individuals out there who like to say it's all evil and they're all out to eat your children. They're all, like the Queen's a shapeshifter and everything. This is part of how people sell books. Okay, so if you want to do that, sure, there's an audience for it. And a lot of the audience in ufology want to be entertained. They don't want the truth. They want to be entertained by it. And I understand that. But for our own fellow humans, we're trying to actually come up with an answer that's beyond entertainment, that's one that's based in reality. And that seems to be kind of a threat for them. It's the authorities that govern over us. It's the same thing as that they don't mind you talking about a UFO, but they don't want you to show one.
Yep. It's always funny to me. I mean, they do this, here on the coast, anytime there's a hurricane, but they do the same thing with the paranormal. They pick the most ridiculous caricature guy they can that's toothless and got a t-shirt that's ripped and they talks like an idiot, and that guy, we're going to talk to that guy. They don't want to talk
to
exactly intelligent people. So
that's exactly what actually goes on. Okay, and that's why even television shows that want to talk about alien beings and such like that, they have their usual talking heads that do their appearances, but a lot of the information that they're actually saying is recovered from pre-interviews with other people about where the writers are trying to get an idea of what's really going on. So those speaking heads of theirs can have something to talk about. And it's all about control. It really is. But if you look at it in your heart, it's like I'm a Christian, but at the same time, I'm dealing with a subject matter that's rife with emotional charge because they all feel like they need to it's all got to be the devil. Okay, and see, from my perspective, it's not a matter of if it's the devil or not. It's a matter of following scripture, for example, where they say that it is your enemy, but the basic lesson in the book of the Bible says you're supposed to forgive your enemy. So when you have contact with your enemy, finally, are you supposed to make peace with them? Because this shows that we've evolved in some way over time. Or do we just carry forth anger that's perpetrated through religion and authority? And I say that we should all speak for ourselves. If something comes in front of you, and it may be lying to you, but at the same time, you can't just say because it has scales like a lizard, it's automatically lying to you. Okay, so even if it's part of the emanation of your own reptilian brain that we inherited from our ancient ancestry, because remember, before there were mammals, there were just the reptiles. And so therefore the mammals are a root off ancient reptile. That's why we have a reptilian part of our brain that controls the autonomic processes of your body, your respiration, your hunger, all those things that run automatically, your breathing. You don't have to think about that because that's part of your reptilian brain. But also the reptilian brain may carry forth information and imagery that we can't quite understand, and it wants to express itself to you in a situation, and we see it as something external to ourselves when actually it's not external, it's internal. So there's these things that we have to look at and balance out, whether something's physically happening or whether something's emotionally happening to the experiencer. And now, of course, YouTube doesn't like you to say, abduction. They don't want you to say, I did another radio show the other day. They said, you can't use the word experiencer either. What? Because they're now a parallel. They say that one means the other. If you're an abduction, if you use the word abduction, it's the same as an experiencer experiences. So you're not allowed to use the word experiencer. So which means is that they're tightening our language, trying to control our free speech.
Yeah.
See, and by saying it has something to do with violence. No, it doesn't. Yeah, you can be abducted, but you can be abducted by your fraternal brothers to go for good hazing or something like that. It doesn't mean that, violence is going to be done upon you, So it's very interesting indeed.
While I was thinking about this, like earlier today, I was really trying to put this piece of the puzzle together, and it's a great question for you, but the archetypal image of the snake, I mean, it seems to be hardwired into our DNA. And I was thinking about this because anytime you look at another culture or whatever, they don't have, aside from centaurs and minotaurs and stuff like that, they don't really have, substitute this animal. There's not like I don't know, like dog entities. There's not like, I can't even think of another, like eagle entities or something like that. It always seems to come back to this archetypal snake image, whether or not you're talking about the Hopi, Quetzalcoatl, Aztec, Mayan, and of course, jump across the pond way over there to Asia, where there's all this lore of dragons. I mean, what do you think that is? Is it hardwired in our DNA, like an ancestral memory, an evolutionary, that reptilian brainstem kind of calling out from beyond? I don't know what to call it, but the psychology of it is wild to me.
You're right on the spot with that. In the early days, in the tribes and the ancient cultures, their form of television was hallucinogens. They'd sit around a fire, they'd bang the drum, they'd all have visions, they'd all talk about what they're seeing, and this brought them happiness, peace, all these other things. And then you have drug use throughout ancient culture, and because this is at the root of the reptilian brain that's trying to free itself, you've now given it a drug that unleashes that and unchains that reptilian. And so therefore we start either being in fear of what we don't understand, or we start embracing it. And that's why people throughout the world and leaderships of different cultures embraced the symbol of the snake, because it made them feel empowered. Because basically, if you think about it, if we have a reptilian part of our brain, you don't want people to be afraid of it, because they're afraid of an aspect of their own psychology and they see it as invasive and an enemy. But if you remind them that this is part of our own deeper nature, then they can freely embrace it and see more. And this is why serpent worship throughout the world was very, very popular. It was a very empowering thing for people to go through. It's not until later we started having organized religions start defining these images and these symbols and making them so stark black and white. And for example, we have dualistic oppositional symbols in India, when they talk about the serpent, and then they talk about the Garuda bird. And the Garuda bird was an enemy of the serpent. And you see these two usually unified in the form of a dragon later on through history, which means balance. You're in balance between your ancient nature and your more playful human nature. And then you have a religion that's predominantly spread throughout the West, where you have bird men, angels, and then you have snake men. So you see that the bird and the snake are always in opposition to each other in that way. And when the modern religions came along, they wanted to do away with snake worship. Okay, so they wanted all to be biblical. And so that's why they said St. Patrick went to Ireland to rid them of snakes. It wasn't that Ireland has a lot of snakes, they don't, but they did have serpent worship. And so that's why when they blended the ancient literatures together to form the Bible, they also made sure that they characterized it in such a way that shows that it can be the deceiver, but at the same time, if you look deeper underneath the nature of things, you recognize that it's us. It's a reflection of our own selves. And so those ancient cultures around the world, they saw that. They embraced, the leadership embraced it without telling everybody. They made everybody else afraid of it. See, so you disempower the general population while you empower yourself by looking at this imagery in a different perspective. Now, people say, nowadays, a lot of people go, well, look, they must have been with the reptilians because they have shields and they have all these snakes all over everything. That's a very simplified way of looking at it. And I guess you could look at it that way if it makes you feel comfortable, but that's not the way that real history has reflected this subject matter.
That's weird. The whole time you're talking about the balance there, I don't know what else to say about it. I was thinking of Quetzalcoatl, which is the plumed serpent god that's half feathered, Quetzal bird and half snake. I wonder if that's some sort of balance, because, as the lore says, he was more of a benevolent deity, juxtaposed to a lot of the other warlike and strife deities in Mexico.
Well, some people believe that that's actually the influence of perhaps the ancient Templars and some of their sea voyages coming from the east and traveling west. And when they ended up coming from the west to the shores of Mexico, for example, they were arriving in ships that may have been Phoenician or Viking built ships. And those ships generally had dragon sails. They also had the bows made of wood, made of dragons. The people on board may have been wearing chainmail, which from a distance looks like snake scales that were impenetrable. So they see all this reptilian symbolism arrive on their shores. And then they, of course, reflected peace with the Quetzal bird. And so you have this feather and the serpent joining. And did the ancient Templars actually set upon ground in these ancient cultures and give them information? And this is cultural transference. We're told it never happened. But then again, there was a German scientist in the 1980s, I think it was, that had analyzed hair samples from mummies in Egypt and found that 8 out of 10 of them had processed marijuana and cocaine in their bloodstreams, not just as pollution on the hair, but in the hair shaft itself, which means they were using cocaine and marijuana. This was not met very aggressively by the rest of the scientists. And despite her findings, they tried to drive her findings underground. And she even said that you could only get processed cocaine from Peru. Exactly. So there must have been some ancient trade route that existed long beforehand that we're not being told about. And I think this is actually the fact. I think some of the pyramid information itself may have been transferred over to Mexico, to a more rudimentary culture that tried to understand it and duplicate it. And that's why there are similarities.
That's pretty wild. I don't know if this was on our things to talk about, but I know the Grand Canyon has been a hotbed for a long time, going back to what you said, something about unsolved mysteries. I love unsolved mysteries when I was younger. And I remember one of those episodes was about, going down the Colorado River and, the Grand Canyon. And there's so much that I don't think the average person even knows about the Grand Canyon. I've seen all kinds of stuff, to today's time. I can't say if it was real or not real. I wasn't there, but a lot is supposedly hidden in the Grand Canyon. And like all these big archaeological sites, they happen to be UNESCO World Heritage Sites, which basically means we don't even own them. And you can't go down there. I've heard you can't go down there. You can't put drones out over there. All this. And I'm going, what's the big hubbub if it's just a big hole in the ground? Why would they be so worried about the average guy going down there and going, hey, what's going on? What's in this hole?
Right. Well, interestingly enough, I was the first person to introduce the story of the Grand Canyon back in the 1990s. I was doing lectures on it, and I was showing people the articles and everything. This is like 1993. And I felt like I had found the location of it. In the course of my research, I got in contact with Chief Beneptawa, which was the main chief of the Hopi tribe, because he was the elder on Old Rabbi, which is the oldest of the mesas that they settled on. So technically he was chief of the whole Hopi, even though he said every mesa has their own chief. So he was the chief of all of them. And I got to know him quite well over a decade and constantly visited him and talked to him and everything. And he acknowledged that their elder serpent brothers and their Sipapu, which they called it, was in the Grand Canyon. And I found other evidence to pinpoint where it was, but I never told the public about it because I was heavily respectable of their sacred sites. And I didn't want a whole bunch of people to start looking at this on the internet or on television and come down and start trespassing, trying to go out and find this location. But he said that in earlier times, when there were great cataclysms, there were people in the tribes that were made contact with, it sounded like a spiritual contact, but he said that they heard whispers telling them to gather together to prepare to go underground again, which they did, and they were led underground by what they call the ant people. And if you think about the ant people, this fits their imagery of what an ant would look like compared to like a small gray alien. And that they were taken underground and that they were provided food and sustenance for a great period of time until the earth went through its revolutions and was safe to go back up again. And then they came back up through the Sipapu opening in the Grand Canyon by who they, being that they called the Spider Woman. And that when they got to the top, a star led them in their travels across the mesas, and the star, wherever the star stopped, they started planting part of their own tribes. And this is why their tribes were dotted around that area. And these serpent brothers are the ones that Chief Beneptua told me that come down to watch them. And at one time I was sitting with a colleague a friend of mine, and we were sitting on this torn up Naugahyde couch in Stanley's house. And he was blind, so he had no lights. There was no running water. And we saw behind him, he had a window that was one of those old windows with multiple wood frames in it. And we could see his silhouette talking to us. And behind him, we saw a light drop down in the distance, and then it split into two. And then a strobe light seemed to be strobing between the two back. Behind him, and we said, "We're seeing something behind you right now. What is that?" And he goes, "Oh, they're just curious as to who you are."
Wow.
So they don't get frightened by things like that. See, they just see them as part of nature, and this is just who they are. And we have to look at these ancient cultures and recognize that some of them are heavily influenced just by the imagery, by their own psychology, by the drugs, and also perhaps by something physical actually coming down. And this is how they've managed to hide in the shadows for so long.
That's interesting. That's so wild.
Mm-hmm.
This again is kind of off the menu probably, but one thing that always has intrigued me as well is kind of the evolution of aliens, for lack of a better phrase here, because if you look at sort of, popular culture history of aliens, I know it went way before that, but if you look at like 1947 and like, the Roswell, Bill and Betty Hill and all that jazz, all the way back to like biblical accounts. And, there seems to be a heck of a transformation. And I think most people are kind of more familiar with that communion cover, Whitley Strieber, they're all grays. But if you look back like 60 years, they had the Nordic ones. We've seen encounters of the reptilians, obviously, the praying mantis sort of people. I mean, there seems to be this broad spectrum where a lot of people are just thinking, oh, it's these little gray guys. That's all it is. These little short gray people. It's so weird. Even
very
the Native American culture, like the Kachina dolls. I mean, they have their own rich oral history of this too. So, I mean, it's a wide world out there, it seems.
Very interesting. It's there's a fellow colloquium meeting, which is a meeting of minds with professors and at a certain university. So we had Los Alamos Labs had a colloquium meeting in 1988 in which they discussed extraterrestrial life. and the possibilities of there being extraterrestrial life. The names they brought up in there are two names, very important: Dale Russell, okay, and Frank Drake. Now, Frank Drake came up with the equation of, hey, it's impossible. Look, they'd have to travel light years away. You know, they're so far away that the chances of meeting them are hardly there. But the one thing they both agreed upon was that the convergence of intelligence amongst animal species is more of a normal trend than people can possibly imagine. Okay, this is Frank Drake and Dale Russell trying to say that to have so many animals on a planet that have no intelligence is counter to what evolution has shown. Evolution has favored intelligence. So like favoring, limbs, and we have to have them to move around with and how to operate with. The physical form of all our creatures tends towards intelligence. And I think it may be that somebody operating that's very ancient, even more ancient than the reptilians perhaps, was perhaps taking animal life forms and endowing them with intelligence and allowing a small group of them to become super intelligence. So that's why you do have these different life forms that seem to have gained intelligence. And it might be that not only did the reptiles and mammals reach intelligence, there may have been other things like insects that they have a measured intelligence, but we don't know how to communicate or watch them closely enough to recognize that intelligence. But the more we're finding out in nature is the more time goes by, the more we can recognize how we can communicate and how we can recognize intelligence in animals. So the idea of having an intelligent animal just doesn't fit. Also, we have to look at like the dinosaurs, for example. We're told that, before the dinosaurs, there were the reptiles. Well, the dinosaurs must have been somewhat warm-blooded, because we're seeing here that, 65 million years ago, if they had died out during a devastation when the meteor asteroid impact on the Earth occurred, then some of them actually managed to survive, and we now know them as birds. So they've changed, they've morphologically changed a lot. They've changed from having scales to feathers, and scales and feathers are relatable scientifically. Okay, because the cells on a human body are microscopic scales, and feathers and skin have a common ancestry to them. So we're seeing that these things are actually all connected, but we're just not aware of it yet. And that when you're looking at creatures that have a trend and have common roots, that's when we start recognizing that we may be talking about terrestrial things more so than off-planet. And there's this other thing about chirality, which is it's how sugars and amino acids work in a body, and it's a matter of left-handed chirality or right-handed chirality. And these get very technical, but they're saying that most of the animals here on Earth, all of the animals here, are right-handed with their amino acids and their sugars. Where on another planet, that may not be the case. Although you may have a reptilian life form on another planet, it may not be compatible to even being in our ecosystem, because it couldn't metabolize any of the food that we have, because its system's completely different. So there may actually be creatures like that who cannot come here. We've had in the Sahara Desert images that look like beings in suits, like space suits. So we can imagine that maybe they're coming from an environment that's not technically ours. So we do have something happening off planet, I'm sure, and somewhere, but we definitely have something happening on planet that they don't want us to look at. Remember, before Roswell and before the sightings in 1947, most of modern literature, fantasy literature, talked not about extraterrestrials, but about other creatures living on Earth with us. Now, all of a sudden, when we saw these craft, the government swept in and changed the entire conversation to off-planet. And I think this was a big trick. I think this was a big lie. It was a big distraction for them to do it, but allowed them to control the subject matter as something that's untouchable, something that we'll never know about, because you can't see it, you can't get off our planet, so it's all possible. But when you're looking for something that's on our planet, it's much more provable. And I think that's why I, over decades now, have received a lot of pressures from people in authority to not pursue the avenue that I have been pursuing.
That's very interesting. It seems funny because they perceive to be all too happy to have people say, "Oh, it's from Planet Pop-Tart, it's a Zeta Reticula, it's all this, that, and the other." It's weird that they're going to push back on something being right here on this planet unless there's something to it. That sounds very, very eyebrow raising.
Yeah, eventually it's going to be told. You know, with the discoveries I've made, there have been recently students who have approached, like the Yale University and stuff, forming thought experiments to see under peer pressure whether it can be withstood. And this met national news. And so I think by even putting a national focus on it is bringing it slightly to our attention that this might be eventually what we're looking at. Now, whether or not I'm involved in that discussion is another thing altogether, because I'm not exactly controllable, because I'm very independent in my thinking, and I won't allow anybody to tell me what to think or what to say. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody on camera is the same way.
Very true. I don't even get into that one. The more I look at the media landscape today, the quote unquote alternative seems a lot like the mainstream to me. That's another.
Right. Yes, it's true. And you know, there are organizations in the United States that have infiltrated all levels of government and science, and they exert a lot of force behind the scenes. And it's not the government that's doing it. These are organizations that are international, and they're all in agreement. That's why personally I believe that everything happening on our planet now has been orchestrated. I don't believe anything is organic anymore. I mean, from what I've discovered about history and everything, they perceive it to be organic, and discoveries and discussions made amongst men who aren't being controlled, who are freedom thinkers and stuff. And it's actually just the opposite. These early ideas are being planted.
I think so too, man. I could not agree more on that one. I think that's exactly what's going on. To the perception of reality.
By the way,
go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, by the way, the serpent image actually created a peaceful international cultures. When contact between cultures first took place, they may have not seen each other as the same, but when they saw that each of them, like the Viking ships or the Phoenician ships, had dragon sails and serpent motifs, and you got to this Central America, and they've already felt that way. There's a kinship that's actually felt. They felt that even though we're different, we have the same God, so we can be more tolerant towards each other. And what they did later on is they devised all these different symbols of different gods and put us into conflict. So we were purposefully put into conflict as separate nations and cultures, with the promise of one day we're all going to come together again. And I think even since 2020, this is the big push, because I think 2020 was the earmarked year in which the entire world has been set forth to a major change, an unbelievable change that nobody's ever witnessed before. And we're only still in the infancy of it.
That's so true. I swear, man. I've talked about this so many times on the show, totally off topic of what we're talking about, but it seems, you know, like the proverbial they, whoever they happen to be, seems to have set up like a big, you know, sporting event between all the different cultures. Like, okay, you've got your colors, you got your mascot. All right, it's, you know, Monday Night Football time, and everybody pick a side while simultaneously everybody's divided. And, you know, the powers that be are just sitting back going, all right, you know, we got
well, they come from an old school of thinking. The old school of thinking is competitiveness creates perfection. In other words, you compete. It's a competing culture. We've all been taught to compete, when actually we're being told at the same time we should assimilate and we should help each other and come into union. So in a school system, for example, we're all taught to compete. And it's not a matter of getting along together, it's competition. It's about burying your opponent. And see, that's all world thought. And we're now moving slowly into one of, instead of competition, it's cooperation. And cooperation just doesn't have the blood and gore and all the excitement they think. So they've been standing off it. But again, it's organized. It's create chaos to bring the solution to everybody. and look like a miracle has happened to give them all hope. And I think we've all been trapped, even politically, in this arena. Personally, I believe that there's a one world government, there has been for a long time, and that the surface governments are controlled to a certain extent to keep us from annihilating ourselves. But at the same time, we're made to look like this is all we've got. And I don't believe that to be true for a single moment. I really do not. And if there's something that your government is holding a secret, if they need to do something they feel bad about, they'll get one of the other governments to do it. So then they don't have any hand in it where they feel that, they've had to do something. Like if a UFO witness had to be killed, are the men in black human? Are they from an underground culture? What is going on? And personally, I've met the men in black 3 times. Okay. And I know each time I met them, these were human beings and they were dressing up in costume. It's like they were told to go put their costume on and get the car all polished and everything like that. The Grand Canyon Caverns, the Grand Canyon Caverns in Arizona is where I encountered them. And it's interesting because the individual that gave me the Dulce information that became so famous about an underground base, which for the last 20 or 30 years I've been talking about, that individual was called and told for me and my colleague not to go back to the Grand Canyon Caverns, otherwise it would be bad for us. We went anyway, laughing, thinking that this person was just jacking us, because they were thinking, oh, let's give them some excitement. We'll just tell them they got a threat or something coming in, But when we get out there to the middle of the desert where we had pulled off before, there were 2 men standing there against their black car. And my colleague refused to get out of the vehicle to talk to them. I had got out and only one of them came forward. The other just remained leaning against the vehicle. And they were ever so helpful. They immediately started talking about what we had been saying in the car previous to arriving there. So in other words, they emphasized that we can hear everything and know everything. So this was part of the intimidation on first contact with them, right? And they were not forcefully aggressive. They didn't say we're going to kill you or anything like that. What they did say is if you and your colleague go out there, there's a lot of mines you could fall down and you could get hurt and never seen again. And to which I answered, thank you very much for your concern, but I think we'll be fine. And even though I was shaking inside, I spun on my heels and turned my back on the man in black and walked away from him. And my colleague and I proceeded to walk off into the desert in search of an underground cave we had thought was there, other than the main canyon, with the tourist spot. And strangely enough, we didn't even say anything about this for like 10 minutes. We just started walking and we were just looking around and everything. And finally I said, did that just happen? Wow. Because it was so shocking that we couldn't even process it. We couldn't even talk about it. We were sitting there like 2 zombies walking around looking, and it wasn't fake. It just didn't occur to us, and it took time for it to sink in. And those are the kind of things that happen. So, and you find people putting listening devices under your cars that you can't find and things like that. You have to think, well, they might be thinking I'm up to something illegal, so maybe they're normal people, just watching or doing something. But at the same time, you can't help but understand that the subject matter has already got a deep history of people being intimidated. So it's just a matter of what are you willing to do? Because these guys can do everything. They can stop your Social Security checks from coming in. They can keep your tax returns from coming in. I did a television show with Kevin Nealon. I was on it 3 separate times. He and the producer both had me in the green room saying, John, if you get back home, will you tell us if you get a jury summons in your mailbox? And I said, why? And he goes, a lot of our people talking about UFOs have got jury summons, so it's been difficult to arrange their interviews. And when I got back to Las Vegas, there was a jury summons in my mailbox. Really? Right. But see, the producers of the show don't want to say anything because this is the way Hollywood gets the wink and nod.
They get the funding
from somebody. Well, because there's millions and millions of dollars and careers on the stake in Hollywood, they will do exactly as they are told. They can't justify, well, we're going to do the right thing. No, that's not the way they think. They think financially about the show. When I did the Grand Canyon Caverns show, talked about the Men in Black on the UFO hunters, they had a forensic artist come out with the police department, Chicago. The guy was a little shady, but cops can come across that way. And when he did the artwork based on our memories, myself and two other people, about the Men in Black we'd encountered, my Men in Black encounter was there at the Grand Canyon Caverns. That's why they shot it there. Afterwards, I get a phone call from the studio, from the production staff, and they're saying, John, did you happen to walk away with the photograph, the artwork? And I said, no. Why? They said, because when we got back to the studios here in Los Angeles, yours was the only image missing. And I said, well, why don't you mention that on the show? And they go, oh, no, not going to do that. See, in other words, they were drawn into it, but they were too afraid to say something unusual happened here, because out of all the artwork we had secured based on these descriptions, his did not make it back, and nobody knows where it is. See, that underscores what they're actually talking about, but they're frightened because they recognize a bigger power that could pull the plug on their television show or the network executives and get pressure. They don't want to go there, so they just don't bring that forward. And I think that if it happens to me, it must be happening to other people too.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, and even a little bit off the air, like how much of our reality is just orchestrated. How much of this is just costume? Like the Men in Black, you said it looked like it was right out of a flipping X-Files video or something. They had their black car, they had the starched suits and the hats and the sunglasses. I mean, even I gotta wonder how much of all of the quote unquote lore in paranormal land is just, even the John Keel stuff. I mean, that's kind of like the first Men in Black thing that comes up on my radar. I'm like, okay, was that legit? Or was that somebody that just was playing a role to try to intimidate what was going on, in West Virginia?
Dan Aykroyd. Dan Aykroyd is a friend of mine. I knew him as brother. I knew his brother more than him. But when he did his television show called Out There in New York City, myself and John Mack were there being interviewed on the same day. It wasn't only until a week or two after our interviews that the show was canceled. So he never got the show aired. So John and a friend of mine was helping in the production to select guests to appear on the show. And I think the guest lineup was far too much for studio executives to handle. And I think Dan was trying to bring this out, and they shut Dan down.
Really?
Yes.
Man.
Yep.
That's crazy.
And it's very easy. It's very easy for them to do that. Now, Dan isn't going to say they shut me down because I'm bringing something out. He's going to be more vague on it and everything like that without pointing a picture. He said he encountered somebody outside. He was getting a call from one of these rock stars or something outside the studios, and across the street he saw what appeared to be a man in black in an older vehicle. Then the next time he looked, he was gone. Okay, but seeing that I had actual men in black encounters, and now I'm doing a television show in New York with John Mack, they were bringing scientists and they were bringing people with great credibility to be interviewed for that show. And I think that particular lineup was what killed the show.
Wow. What time frame are we talking with this, if you don't mind me asking? Well, like 80s, 90s?
I'd have to get back. I've been doing this for 30 years.
Oh,
I'm trying to think of when that occurred. Had to be in the 2000s. I know that.
Oh, okay.
So the early 2000s. And I'd have to get back in my notes, but you can look up on the interview. Anybody that asks Dan Aykroyd can ask him about, John Mack going there and what happened. What was it that caused the show to collapse or shut down? And what happened to the episodes? And does he still have license to the episodes or not? Because I think that would be very interesting to hear what people had to say on his show.
It's so wild because I know the listeners and the average person's going, oh, it's, this guy's got so much cachet in Hollywood. How could they just pull the plug on him? And I think that's kind of that blind spot a lot of people have, that the people that we think are these quote unquote big wigs, if you will, they can get their shows pulled just like you and I could.
Yeah, absolutely. It's It's all tightly controlled. And, even the executives are difficult. Even the television shows, Ancient Aliens, if any of those shows, you say, what title do we put down below you? I'll say, well, okay, since I discovered the subject of the reptilian stuff, how put down there pioneer in reptilian studies? Oh no, we can't do that. See, we can't guarantee that because the executives they'll most likely change that. See, so even people making the TV shows, the producers and everything, have to pass all these episodes through executive level. And those people are usually businessmen, and they belong in a fraternal brotherhood. Okay. And they have an agreement amongst all of them, just like certain radio show hosts who might want to blackball people have a blacklist and call other radio show hosts and say, will you join my blacklist, program that we've got going on here, because there's some people we shouldn't just have on the air. And there's been TV radio show hosts, very popular ones even today, that are part of that problem. They're either on the receiving end of it or they're on the chaos end of it. But then you got egos involved too. So it's very hard to tell what the heck is going on.
Yeah. I mean, I had another guest on. I don't know if they want me to mention, but whatever. I'll just give you the story. She was saying, she got approached by these different shows, kind of like the ones you're talking about. And they didn't want her to do the interview. They didn't want her up there on camera. They were like, could you give this guy all your data and information? And, they were taking clips that she had done off camera and applied it to that's a very popular. Yeah, that's a very popular thing for them to do. Okay, when you see the TV shows that are usually only owned by one company in Hollywood, but they have 2 or 3 different alien shows going on, and they're taking pre-interviewed discussion topics and points and saying, thank you very much, we're not using you. They do that a lot. That's why during pre-interviews, I would suggest that nobody gives them the absolute fruit of their knowledge, but just teases them with it, saying, I know more, but I'm not going to discuss it in a pre-interview because I've seen too many of my points literally taken. And I'm to that point as well myself, where I'm very selective on who I do interviews with anymore, because after 30 years, I don't need more TV time. I've done hundreds of television shows. If you look for me on Facebook, you won't find me hardly. Okay, because I've been shadow banned. So the people with real credibility get shadow banned. And so they're not even coming up on search lists. And I express this to you. I do television shows like Ancient Aliens, Unsolved Mysteries. I do a bunch of them. The topic matter I speak intelligently on it. But after an appearance like that, I might get 3 or 4 people only new at a Facebook page, out of a nation of 339 million viewers. Okay. So, it feels a little bit like Sisyphus pushing a rock uphill. Yeah.
A person pounding their head on the wall, but, a lot of people give up, but I've been doing this for so long, I'm not going to give up. I'm now one of the old timers. So people look back at me. I look at conferences and I don't see any of the people that I used to talk with at conferences. They've all disappeared almost. And there's a lot of instant personalities showing up, with their own podcasts and stuff. There's interviewers that interview people, but their main goal is to turn themselves into celebrities. So they turn from interviewer into the celebrities, into the talkers. We're the speakers now. Okay, so when people see that there's an audience there and they're hungry for attention, that's what you're dealing with in today's world. I don't need the attention anymore. What I'd like to do is get enough evidence out there to promote people into thinking logically and scientifically and bringing the subjects down to earth a little bit and recognizing that a lot of this fluff is just fluff.
Absolutely is. I see the same thing all over social media. It's like, where'd this person come from? They got this random person no one's ever heard of that's got 10 million followers. They're getting 1,000 hits a minute or whatever it is. I'm like,
right. And that's fine. For the authorities, they think that's great.
Yeah.
Because it's just people spinning their wheels. And that's what covert ops and all that stuff is all about. And these guys that run covert ops in the United States, for probably Section D of the FBI or somebody like that. The agencies tend to hire out to third parties, criminals, and people like that to do the work because they don't need to get their hands dirty. I've actually had somebody in a federal position take me by the shoulder once when I was having difficulty getting copies of paperwork, federal paperwork. And this person who was in charge of the entire division comes out, he sees me, puts his hand on my shoulder, says, "Let me walk you out." And then on the way out, he says, "I don't know who you've pissed off, but you've got some of the most disgusting, horrible, violent individuals in the world working black ops on you."
Jeez.
Okay, and he says, "I don't want," and he said, "I don't want anything to do with them. I don't know you. I don't know what you've done, but their intimidation of me is forcing me to say this to you and warn you." Okay, so all of this is behind the scenes. It doesn't happen to everybody. I wish I were making it up. It'd be easier. It'd be less stressful, but I just gotta keep going on where I've launched off from and just keep moving forward and don't stop.
I keep going back to that touchstone that you mentioned earlier. Like, what if all this stuff is not extraterrestrial, but intra? Like there's a lot of, hoopla now. It's the underwater UFOs, the UAPs, and, we already know there's a litany of bases under the ground. So,
right. Well, that's been my main focus since the early 1990s. Is focusing on underground bases like Dulce and revealing the fact that we may be talking about something terrestrial. And like I said, remember, before the 1947 sightings, almost everybody was looking at unknown life forms or monsters in our own planet. And all of a sudden, that entire perspective shifted off planet.
That's why.
And when it did that, it distracted us into the wrong location. Yeah, we know that there's a chance that they might be coming out, but if there's more of a chance of finding evidence on our own planet, shouldn't that be where we're looking?
Yeah.
Even if you had extraterrestrials here, how many generations of them have to be born here instead of taking day trips back and forth to set up shop? Or how many generations have to be born here before they say, "Well, I'm not human, but I am terrestrial"? And that's part of the conversation that I think that the governments are trying to keep us from engaging in.
And I mean, I go back to the obvious here. Sometimes just our limited field of vision, people automatically think, we're the alpha everything on the planet. We've got it all figured out, all this stupid hubris that I think most humans have. But I mean, they forget we have a very limited light spectrum. Other animals on this planet can see a whole spectrum we can't even see. I mean, we're not even getting into the portals and the, cloaking mechanisms that allegedly exist for our own technology. I got to believe these interterrestrials, if you will, probably got some a little bit better than that.
Yes, and there's also people that say, "I've seen somebody shapeshift in front of me," and I think that's really part of their own inner psychology, like an eidetic memory, like a child would have, where it sees things come alive, but they're not, like a panorama, like a one of those children's toy sets, which they have a diorama, which they have people, stores, cars, and everything on a board. And I think an eidetic memory for the child would make those people come alive in his mind. And actually, through the visual system, the child doesn't see it as something that's not happening. They actually see it overlay their visual system. And this is eidetic memory. And so I think some people who meet people who are hiding a lot of their own personality and being deceptive or intentionally, or could be potentially very evil or mean, people themselves sense this, and they start seeing this reptilian side come out through their eidetic memory, overlaying the person's physical image. And it's their own subconscious brain saying, "Be careful of this individual." It doesn't necessarily mean they're reptilian humanoid.
That's true. And you got, I mean, like we already talked about, the Native American culture with their rich oral tradition, talking about shapeshifters and talking about portals and all these things that I think, a lot of academics went, "Oh, they're just old. They don't know what they're talking about." I'm like, come on.
But the thing is, once you start talking about shapeshifting, you've actually diluted and hurt ufology, because anybody out there can say, "Oh, Well, he's a shapeshifter. I don't like them. They're shapeshifters. Look at that vertical pupil. I happened to work in a television station once. And I'll tell you what, as a producer director, I'll tell you what, if the lights are not set properly, and you have one set to the left and right of the camera, the blast from the light reflective on a curved surface of an eyeball tend to squeeze in the pupil. And you're only seeing the round pupil is being now distorted by the overlay of the bright lights. Now the round blackness looks vertical. See? And a lot of people are saying, well, that person shapeshifted right in front of you. You could tell they're reptilian. Well, it hasn't got to do with that. We had to be aware of that in television industries to set up the lights correctly so that doesn't happen. But you can see where people have taken that.
Mm-hmm.
So that actually does a lot of it breaks the credibility of ufology by pointing in that direction when people know there are rational technical reasons for that happening. But the loud voice gets the biggest attention. It's like in the press. The headlines get the attention, the retractions get one sentence on page 11.
That's the truth.
You know. Headlines always speak louder than the truth.
Man. Well, you already covered so much of this with the Dulce work, and we hardly even got into that. But what's your take?
Right.
I know it's made a lot of press lately. All the elites are going underground. They're all going underground to these bases and you know, X, Y, and Z. I don't know. You know, I know there's a lot of Cold War era bases. I remember I used to date a girl whose father would talk about, yeah, worked at Fort Ritchie, Maryland, or whatever. It was a big secret base.
Fort Ritchie, yes.
Vietnam era, I think. But you know, there's so much more than those old Cold War bases that are under there. And I don't think you got more info on that than me, so I'll defer to you on that.
Well,
one.
you know, it was interesting. A number of years ago, one of the first reports that I thought was absolutely fascinating was the fact that a newspaper down in Miami, I think it may have been the Miami Herald Tribune, I'd have to look that up in my records, but they came out with an article saying that they had made a call to the government and found out about FEMA. Mm-hmm. And they found out that 3/4 of all the people in FEMA at that time had above top secret clearances. And then they said, why would they have above top secret clearances? 3/4 of the people involved in FEMA, which is trying to prepare us for a nuclear war underground or something like that. It just seems like a little bit much, right?
Yeah, I thought they were just handing out water and tarps, you know.
Right. No, what it turns out is that FEMA's original designation was to make sure of the survivability of the government and continuity of government operations after a disaster. It had nothing to do with people. Had nothing to do with helping people. So that's why when Hurricane Katrina came along, they were so inept in everything they did. It's because all of their focus has never been on the rest of us. General Altunen, who was a Secretary of Defense or Deputy of Defense over in Russia, in a book that I have, was quoted when he was asking the Russian parliamentary for more money, had said that the United States had already at that time, and this is in the 1990s, 270,000 underground bases. And so I went, 270,000 underground bases, and that they had built, that we had built, that the Russians counted. And I'm sitting here thinking, we're only talking about a few of them, 270,000 bases, exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think that they were so afraid of a nuclear war that they may have actually have underground bases and even done test programs in which they put people in the underground bases to see how they would work out, what kind of problems they would have psychologically, socially, any other issues like that. And they may have been running these people underground as trapped civilizations or trapped personages for a long time just to see what the effects, the psychological and physical effects would be in advance of their taking occupation on a large scale. And when they show underground bases like Ritchie or over in the Carolinas, there's another one I forget, and I'll remember its name in a minute, which the government has admitted was an underground base, and it was being maintained by a television company, a local television company, Greenbrier Hotel. The Greenbrier Hotel, yes. within reach, like maybe 30 minutes of driving out of Washington. They had this as the first place for Congress to go to in case of a nuclear war. And it was a hotel, and the entire bottom of the hotel was an underground base with large conference rooms and bunk beds and dining halls and all kinds of stuff. And they had a company on the surface that was disguised as a television repair company, and they were in charge of maintaining the entire base. But of course, this is all public knowledge now. Mm-hmm. So they're not there. They have that. And it's very interesting because they show it as very gray concrete, very sparse. Nobody would want to stay in there long.
Yeah.
And really, that's not the way it is. The real underground bases in the United States are made by people who are Imagineers from Disney and stuff like that. If you've ever been to like Las Vegas, to the Caesar's Palace, they have a mall in there, and it's like a Roman roadway, and they have the clouds on the ceiling, and they have the shops to the left and the right. This is more actually of what we have.
Wow.
This is what we have. And you have to think, if people are going to go underground, who are they going to get to do the dishes and make the beds?
Yeah, they got to have their
general. It's not going to be a general,
so to speak.
Right. It's not going to be a general. So who's that going to be? And are they allowed to bring their family?
Jeez.
See, so all of this has to be worked out in advance of some sort of a major disaster. And that's what they have been doing. Dulce is a different thing altogether. It looks like, Dulce. I get interviewed for years, decades about Dulce. And every time I mention, hey, those radio towers up there, if you look at who they're registered to on that mountain up there, it's kind of interesting, but no TV show will touch it. They won't mention it because there's two groups. One of them, and this used to be off of city data information on the internet, where they talk about cities and their data, what the population base is being, the average income and everything. And when you look up who had the registration on those towers up there, one of them was a law firm that had scientists involved that were working in genetics. And the other was a Department of Energy, DOD antenna that was involved in electromagnetic spectrum studies. So electromagnetic spectrum studies and genetic studies, they're under the official registers of the antennas on the actual mesa. Makes you think, well, why on that small Indian reservations would they have anything to do with there? So it underlines that something's really going on, but I cannot get a television show to talk about it.
That's weird. And it's on an Indian reservation too. So they basically already own the land and can do whatever they want.
Right. Well, even where the base is, they keep misdirecting people to the mesa. And it's not the mesa. There's a mesa directly north of the town that hugs the town. And there's a road that goes around it. And they keep mentioning to the northeast where these towers are. This is where the base is. And it's not actually that. It's to the northwest. There's a road that goes out towards another Indian reservation, and where they meet, they've had the Indians that have taken me there say, this is where the craft have been seen to come in out of the mountain. They point to the left-hand side of the road, and they say, this is where we found the body. And I'll say, what body? Somebody dropped somebody from a helicopter and onto the reservation, and this person was basically pulverized on the fall through the trees and everything to the ground, so we knew he was dropped from great height. They also found a head on a spike facing inwards towards the Hopi reservation. So they were psych ops or something like that. Psyops was trying to get people are trying to get people to stay away from that particular area. They don't mind that the television shows go elsewhere. And when I get up there with the television shows, I tell them where it is, but inevitably they don't care what the experts say that have been studying this. They keep pointing towards the antennas and redirecting everybody out there saying, well, this is where the base is. I did a TV show once where they had to tell me on camera to stop laughing. Okay, this is Jesse Ventura's show. Okay, Jesse's great. Okay, so we get out there. I show them in advance in a map where this base is. They take me out to an area that I have never been to before, and they're all like walking around going, well, the base is over here, and it's all over here. And I'm thinking, what a crock this is. And I start smiling because I'm thinking, this is just terrible, right? So the producers on the show, they're in charge of shooter are cut. John, don't smile so much. No, I'm trying not to laugh because this whole thing was a farce. Okay. And then finally, Jesse pipes up and goes, "Is this a scripted show or is this reality TV? Don't tell him what to do."
Mm-hmm.
Okay, he got really mad. So he had integrity, but the production people didn't.
Man.
Right. So it's hard to get the truth out when the networks and the executives have other things in mind. Because before most of these interviews and shows, they have in their mind what's really going on. Even though you've been studying it for 20, 30 years, they don't want to hear what you have to say. They want to hear what you have to say that they can use because they have it in their own mind what's going on.
Yeah, they got to fit the narrative.
Right, their own narrative. And the script writers on the shows, they're not researchers, they're not experts. But they feel that they have the power to be in control of the subject matter. Yeah, it's very interesting. You thought you're going to hear about UFOs today, and now you're hearing about how behind the scenes are run.
Could you scoot over a little bit? You're about to get off frame there.
Oh, there you go. I think my camera moved, actually.
There we go. That's perfect.
There you go.
Yeah, there's a site sort of south of Durham. I thought you were talking about that one. I've never investigated it. It's called the Big Hole of Chatham County.
Okay.
It's some kind of, I think it was allegedly like a phone company site, but it's a big cordoned off, the gates, the whole 9 yards. You can't get near it. And I'm like, very strange to be,
Big hole.
Yeah. I haven't ever gone there.
There's another big hole out in Australia near Pine Gap.
Really?
They say this hole pre-existed before Pine Gap was set up by the CIA in Central Australia. This hole was actually extremely deep, and it was perfectly circular. And what they ended up doing is they ended up dropping antenna wires down there and using ultra low frequencies in order to let the rock of the geology of the United States itself be a conduit for the signals to reach the oceans and to communicate with submarines. Because very low frequencies transfer through rock very easily.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how they were establishing worldwide global contact with their subs. I don't know if I'm getting into classified stuff at this point, but that's kind of where you hear these deep hole things. Then you have to understand that may be connected with that kind of a research.
Yeah, I don't think this was an actual hole. I think it was just like a secret site that is sort of like in the middle of North Carolina. But I heard about.
They have them.
Go ahead.
Yeah, they have them. They have them all over the place. And they say to local officials, if you play along, you'll get a seat there with your family if something goes wrong. Those are empty promises that will never be fulfilled, by the way. Okay, that's how they manipulate people. They manipulate people even that work on their behalf with empty promises.
Yeah, the internet saying this used to be an AT&T facility that just happens to
And
still be gated off with like guard posts.
And there are many of those across the United States. So they need to keep their infrastructure working in case some nuclear war happened and everything. So every so often they need to plant underground bases along conduit lines and everything so they can have a place of operations that they can work out of in case something happens to that section. And the same thing with the vacuum tube shuttle trains. I personally believe that's going on right now, and it has for many years. In 1970s, they had 71, 72, they had the Los Angeles Times ran an article that it was an interview with the Rand Corporation's lead scientist that said at that time they had capabilities of putting maglev trains underground that would make it from coast to coast in less than 30 minutes. This was 1970 with technology at the time. So if you can imagine a military that thinking we got to get underground in case the Soviets tried to nuke us, and we need to survive, that's the optimum transportation system to set up for transporting weapons, for nukes, for transporting personnel, for transporting personnel out of the bases in case a base gets overrun. All of that stuff is real. It's real. It's technology that's very old. And Elon Musk is dancing around it probably because he holds licenses that nobody else does, and he gets permissions that nobody else does. Because I've even on my X account, I've challenged Musk saying, hey, Mr. Musk, I asked two AIs, not just one, two AIs, how much pollution each one of your satellites going up creates. And it says something like 53,000 cars worth of pollution in a year goes up with each shot. And I go, okay, 53,000 cars pollution every year. You know, why doesn't he just take one of these maglev trains, slope it slowly up a mountain, and eject it like a bullet?
Yeah.
And where it's traveling 15,000 miles an hour, and it'll reach escape velocity very easily, and there won't be any big exhaust plumes with all that stuff. See, so this is where we should be headed, but that's not where we are now.
That's kind of what I thought all along. I think it was probably 90s old as well, where people were talking about this hum sound. It was like the hum in the upper Midwest, and there was another hum in the
Southwest. Hum, right.
Yeah. And I was thinking, well, they're digging something somewhere. You just can't see what they're digging.
It's low frequencies. It's usually large equipment, generators such for the city or for the county or for military bases. And like I said, those low frequencies carry through the ground, the geology, very easily. So when you've got something working at extreme low frequencies, that signal will travel some great distances. And the rock, even the foundations of your own home, act like a conduit for that to be introduced into your own structure. You know, but then also we know that the Russians are using microwaves as microwave weapons against people that make them sick. And, you know, because they're trying to hurt people. So we have all these technologies going on. Some of them might be our own government doing it. I've seen some of our generals, Air Force general once was quoted as saying, before we use this technology on our enemies, we should be using it on the American people first to see if it works. Now, this is him. This is him saying it. Okay, he thought it was more ethical to test our own people with the weaponry than to submit foreign aggressors to it, and before we've only hurt our own people.
Sounds like a great idea.
Right. Right. So a lot of this could be our own technologies at work too, just to see how people would react. It's like some of the cattle mutilations that occur near a missile silo or something. They're trying to see how our missile silo personnel are going to react, just like the missile silo sightings in Montana in the 1970s. It doesn't necessarily mean they're extraterrestrials. It could be our own guys who have our own craft back engineered. We're trying to test to see what the average reaction is going to be, whether these people can still even function.
Yeah.
Having seen that. Now, I've done a lot of work with cattle mutilations, which I think is the most exciting work I've done, only because it's much more provable. It's much more scientific, you know. So to me, it gives me satisfaction. I've just mentioned for the first time on another show just recently that I told Tom Kuka, who is the sheriff up in Ponderay County in Montana, where they had all these cattle mutilations. If this is a scientific thing going on, I noticed that in 2006, this cow was mutilated. It happened on the day when you checked the weather reports and saw the annual reports for all the weather and saw that that day had the strongest winds of the entire year. And then I said, if they're testing any kind of contamination, they'll test it on that day, and then they'll test further and further out in a V formation where the wind spreads like this. And you'll find other cattle mutilations going on within that same triangle of spread. And we were able to determine that it looked like a pig farm community up there had accidentally spilled 3,000 gallons of pig sewage into a drinking reservoir that was feeding 3 cities.
Jeez.
Okay, and that's where the cattle mutilation happened. Okay, so we're talking about somebody out there that's like in that movie Contact that helps Jodie Foster make it on the space trip. You know, somebody out there who's got a degree of compassion for everybody else, and they're testing animals and leaving them there without incinerating them or anything, because they're hoping that we would pick up on the clues as to what's going on and what are they being tested for. And the bodies, when they line the bodies up, the line of bodies are usually towards bodies of water. And so that's how I determined. I had to look at the lake. And then the next year, what happened is I'd go back and on like Google Earth, I'd place a place mark where the cow was and a place mark where the canal opening was to the lake. and I'd draw a line right through it, and I would extend the line out. And the next year that happened, 2 more cows were mutilated. One was dropped exactly on that line that I had drawn out the year previous.
Mm-hmm.
Right on that line. And when I went there with the sheriff, I said, is there a missile silo around here or something? And I looked up. Sure enough, there was a missile silo, and from where I could see the calf. So I went back to Google Earth and I drew a line from where the calf was through the missile silo, and it landed right on the water tower of the pig farm.
That's wild.
Right. So somebody was trying to direct my attention to water supply,
mm-hmm.
not the nuke site. Because where the cow was found, Google Earth also has where you can go back in history and look at the satellite images. I saw tire tracks starting after before the cattle mutilations, tire tracks over time, starting from the nuclear silo over towards the field where the cow was found, near where a water well was. So those guys were testing the local water around there from the nuke facility. The sheriff would not contact Malmstrom Air Force Base. He was a little intimidated as to the whole thing, because I said if this cow was dropped here, they'd have cameras on that fence line around the nuke facility, and they would have cameras showing what happened. Let's see if we can get those cameras. And at that point, cooperation was stifled, because I think there was a level of intimidation he felt going on. Okay, this might be a government operation going on, and I'm a high official in the state and everything. I just can't get involved at that level.
Yeah, they should have some cameras. Anything near any kind of base, especially a nuke base, they got all kinds of surveillance.
Oh, they have cameras
5 miles from that base. So
they have all kinds of cameras. And Tom called me the following year and said, John, he says, he's laughing. I said, what is it, Tom? And he goes, well, I just can't imagine this, but, technically I have to think of you as a suspect. I said, why? And he goes, because you told me exactly to a year to the day, and that's exactly what happened. And I can't get past that without thinking in some way you've got to be connected.
Jeez.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're just drawing the correlation there. It's a correlative factor right there.
It's natural. I said, I can't do all this stuff. I don't have a chopper. I don't have a way of not leaving footprints and depositing a cow's body. When I got out there, it had been out there for 6 weeks in the sun. Not a birds would land on occasion, but they walk around for 2 or 3 seconds and then fly away. They wanted nothing to do with that cow's body. Meanwhile, another cow died about 1/4 of a mile away. They take me to the other cow, and they said, this one died only 2 weeks ago. The one you visited, the mutilated cow, that's been there for 2 months. This one out there 2 weeks ago, it was to the bone. There was no flesh left on it. Very, very few bones, but it was to the bone. And that was another cow. And he goes, see, this is what predators do. They don't leave it like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's not predation. And they can't get, and local officers are much smarter. They call the state, and the state is where they meet their opposition, because if it has something to do with a contaminated site that needs cleanup, can you imagine hundreds of millions of dollars going to that and everything? What it would do to your meat industry? Okay, so then I get a phone call from the gentleman that appeared with Oprah Winfrey on that famous episode where he says, "I'm never eating meat again," and I'm in the business, and this caused a big uproar in the news, if you can remember that. He called me and he said, "John, I want you to know that," he says, "even though we won that lawsuit, Oprah paid for the whole thing. George Bush at the time went and made it actually if you say anything that's going to make people feel uncomfortable about our food chain, that is now an act of terrorism."
Of course it is.
Okay, so he said that's how they stopped him. And he was calling me just to let me know, because that's what they're doing now. Okay, so we can't even really come out with the truth about cattle mutilations without being called terrorists. To me, that's amazing.
That's insane.
It's all about finances. They're protecting industries. And these industries have been going for 100+ years, and they've got powerful people, and they are dangerous, dangerous, dangerous. We've seen it in all the spy movies. When it gets over 100 million into the billions, you got people dealing with, we're justified in killing this individual because look how many jobs it's going to affect and how many food is going to take off all the tables of all our employees. They look at the trickle-down effects, and they justify that for acting the way they do.
Yeah, you'll have a Michael Hastings car accident or a Gary Webb assisted suicide with 3 bullets in your head.
Gary Webb, he did the right thing. I mean, he was following up on real information, and they took him out. Barry Seal, they say was involved in that down in Central America on behalf of the CIA and everything. The movie American Made was about that with Tom Cruise, and they killed him supposedly. Okay, and I say supposedly because he was a marked man from the very beginning, and he was so liked amongst law enforcement. I can't see them just abandoning him to an assassination.
Yeah,
I think the whole thing was a con job to give him another life. I'm pretty sure Barry's out there right now.
I wouldn't be surprised. I keep coming back to the point we've been talking about here. It seems like so much of our current reality is a big psyop one way or the other, whether it's, Men in Black getting the costume out of the costume shop or, people that are dead that are not dead.
I think you're right. I've had people say they've talked to me on a telephone and I've never talked to them. So they just like now they have duplication where you can duplicate your own voice.
Oh yeah.
For internet stuff. The government had that a long time ago. So they're actually infiltrating and cutting into communications and acting as if they're you to stop and block opportunities from happening or to ruin them or give you a bad name. All of that is tech that's out there now. Because as we know, you can't believe what you see or hear anymore.
That's for sure. John, man, I hate to end our interview, but I feel like I've gone way over your time. I think we're an hour 31 right now. So,
wow. Okay. I better let you go so you have some more room on the net for everybody else.
Yeah. Well, we got to do this again, man. I don't think we hardly even scratched the surface. My goodness, we could go in all kinds of directions from this. Goodness.
Yeah, this was eclectic. This was great. I love, speaking about the panoramic view of ufology. Absolutely. Of course, focusing on reptilians and men in black and underground bases and cattle mutilations.
Man, there's so much more we could get into. I feel like we got to get into the cattle people some more. That's just wild.
That's very interesting research. It really is. And at this point, I helped other law enforcement officials. They've seen me on television stuff, so I do help them, but I keep it very on the down low because if it has anything that's going to affect the economy of anywhere, I need to take that into consideration. Yeah. I'm not out there to destroy local economies or anything like that. So I've served a purpose by giving these guys ideas of where to look for potential contaminations and everything based on what I can see. And I feel like in some way, the job that was a hobby has turned out to be quite useful. And that's what I like best is something that you could put into operations that helps people on a qualified level to be able to understand what's happening instead of being lost in the chaos of the conversation.
That's true. There's enough chaos out there for Pete's sake. So
there's a lot. Just turn on your computer or your TV and you can see it all over the place.
Absolutely.
So my next appearance will be on Unsolved with William Shatner. They're doing an episode that's supposed to air any time now about the dinosaurs and their potential evolution into reptilian humanoids. That's what I was interviewed for. So you can keep your eye out on that.
That sounds great. Well, thank you so much, John. Tell us the best way that people can follow what you do and support you. I'm going to put your website on the screen while you're talking.
Okay. Let's see. Twitter, X, I'm at the Crypto Hunter. And on Facebook, I'm at John Rhodes, Crypto Hunter. You'll have to search hard for it and find me. And let's see, the website is reptoids.com, reptoids.com. It's rather old. I'm going to need to update it soon. If anybody's out there that really knows web stuff and would love to participate, give me a call. Hopefully by then, it won't have already been taken care of.
That sounds great. Well, if you'll stick around for a minute, I'll wrap things up and say goodbye to you off there if that works for you.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, John. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you,
really
man. It's been a pleasure. I had a great conversation. Great conversation. All right, folks. Man, great conversation. Hopefully y'all took some notes on this one. Feel free to replay this, go back, pause it. That's what I like to do when I'm watching good stuff like this. Take some notes. You'll need to. As I always say, you can't do everything, but you can do something. Please get out there, do your part, make a difference, and I'll be seeing you sooner than later in the Anomic Age.
Thank you for listening to The Anomic Age, a John Age project. For past shows, further info, and to comment, go to anomicage.com. That's ANOMICAGE.com. Till next time, thank you for listening to The Anomic Age.